The battle had raged for months. The Talzar Empire was relentless, its war fleets tearing through human defenses like fire through dry leaves. The United Earth Navy had fought bravely, but their forces were stretched too thin, their weapons too outdated against the sheer numbers of the enemy. Admiral Rains stood on the bridge of the UEN Valiant, his eyes locked on the holographic display. Red dots, Zalzar warships, filled the screen, surrounding the last line of human defenses near Vega Prime, one of Earth's oldest and most populated colonies. If Vega Prime fell, Earth itself would be vulnerable. "We've lost the Drakon and the Stalwart," a young officer reported, his voice tight with fear. They were overrun within minutes. Rains clenched his fists. He had known this battle was unwinnable, but they had no choice. They had to hold the line for as long as possible. A harsh, insect-like voice crackled over the comms. High Commander Xiron of the Xalzar spoke with cruel amusement. "Humans, your resistance is pointless. Surrender now, and we may let some of you live. Fight, and we will burn your world to ash." The bridge was silent. Every officer turned to Rains, waiting for his answer. His jaw tightened. They would never surrender. "Send a reply," he said coldly. "Tell them to go to hell." The comms officer hesitated for a moment, then nodded. A moment later, the channel cut off. The Xalzar's response was immediate. Their fleet surged forward, weapons glowing with lethal energy. "All ships, prepare for impact." The first wave of Xalzar attacks struck with devastating force. Human cruisers exploded one after another, their shields unable to withstand the onslaught. The Valiant shook violently as enemy fire ripped into its hull. Sparks flew from the control panels. "We can't hold this position," shouted the tactical officer. "We're outnumbered 20-1. Rains knew it was hopeless. The enemy was too strong, too many. But then, there was something else. A secret humanity had kept hidden for decades. A final weapon, untested, feared even by those who had created it. He turned to his second-in-command, Captain Hayes. "Send the signal," Rains ordered. "It's time." Hayes hesitated. "Sir, are you sure?" Rains met his gaze, his expression grim. "We have no other choice. If we don't, humanity falls today." The captain nodded and tapped a secure code into the console. A signal was sent. A single transmission directed to the most classified location in the entire United Earth Navy's database. Deep in the void, where no one had dared venture for years, something awakened. A machine unlike any other. A warship beyond imagination. The Leviathan was coming. And the galaxy would never be the same again. The bridge of the Valiant was silent, save for the hum of damaged systems struggling to hold together. Admiral Rains stared at the tactical display, his eyes locked onto the sea of red dots swarming closer. The Xalzar fleet had sensed weakness. They knew humanity's forces were failing, their defenses crumbling. They'd pressed their attack with renewed aggression, their weapons slicing through human warships like blades through paper. The Drakon was gone. The Stalwart had been reduced to burning debris. The once mighty human fleet was now a scattering of crippled ships, barely holding formation. And yet, despite the overwhelming odds, Rains stood firm. His mind was focused on one thing, the signal. A single encrypted transmission, sent to the darkest corner of human-controlled space, a place so secret, so dangerous, that even the highest-ranking officers spoke of it only in whispers. The Leviathan. No one had seen it in years. Most believed it was a myth, a story meant to frighten enemies and inspire hope in desperate times. But Rains knew better. The Leviathan was real. And now, it was waking up. "Sir, incoming transmission from High Commander Xiron," the comms officer reported. Rains exhaled sharply. "Put him through." The holographic display flickered, and the insectoid form of High Commander Xiron appeared. His sharp mandibles clicked together, his black eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. "Admiral Rains," Xiron hissed, "your forces are broken. Your warships burn in the void. Humanity is finished. Rains remained unmoved. "You underestimate us, Tyron. That's a mistake." The Kazulzar commander let out a deep, chittering laugh. "A mistake? No, human. The mistake was thinking you ever had a chance. Your species is weak, scattered, and dying. The last remnants of your fleet are nothing but scrap waiting to be salvaged. And you will not live to see your homeworld burn." Rains didn't flinch. He simply folded his arms, his expression cold, calculating. "We'll see about that." Siren's mandibles twitched in amusement. "Your courage is meaningless. You will all die here." With that, the transmission cut off. Moments later, the Salzar fleet advanced in full force. "Enemy ships are moving in, Admiral," the tactical officer shouted. "They're preparing for a final strike." "Hold position," Rains ordered. "Sir," the officer blinked in disbelief. "Hold position," Rains repeated, his voice calm. "It won't be long now." Seconds stretched into eternity. The Kazulzar fleet drew closer, their weapons charging for one final devastating blow. Human ships braced for impact, shields flickering, power levels critical. They were out of time. And then, a deep tremor rippled through space, a shockwave, silent but undeniable. The very fabric of the void seemed to shift, distort, as if something impossibly vast was forcing its way into reality. The view screen flickered. A new signal had appeared on the tactical display. One massive, singular blip. Not red, not human blue. Something else. A presence that sent a ripple of fear through every Exalzar commander in the sector. A voice, synthetic yet somehow alive, echoed across every frequency. "Unity Leviathan, on a line." Then, from the abyss of deep space, it emerged. The Leviathan was unlike any warship ever built. It was a beast of metal and fire, its hull black as the void itself, absorbing the light around it. Towering beyond the size of any dreadnought, its structure pulsed with energy, its engines roaring like a living thing. And then, it fired. A single shot. A beam of energy so pure, so concentrated, that it cut through the heart of the Xalzar fleet like a god's wrath made manifest. Entire warships vaporized in an instant, their shields shattering, their hulls crumbling to dust. The explosion sent debris spiraling in all directions, Xalzar formations thrown into chaos. The enemy fleet panicked. They had expected an easy victory. Instead, they had awakened something beyond their worst nightmares. On the Valiant, the crew stared in stunned silence. Rains allowed himself a small, grim smile. "The real battle," he murmured, "has just begun." The battlefield was no longer a battlefield. It was a graveyard. Wreckage floated in the void, burning fragments of what had once been the proud Salzar Armada. Where once thousands of enemy warships had loomed, only chaos remained, and at the center of it all, the Leviathan stood like a god of destruction, its black hull absorbing the light of dying stars. Admiral Rains sat in silence aboard the Valiant, watching the devastation unfold. His officers were speechless. No one had ever seen firepower like this. Not even the most advanced human battleships could compare. "The Leviathan," one of the officers whispered. "It's real." Rains allowed himself a small nod. It was always real. The Leviathan did not hesitate. It moved through the wreckage with terrifying purpose, its massive frame gliding through the void as if gravity itself bent to its will. The few Xalzar ships that remained were trying to escape, engines burning at full capacity, desperate to flee. But it was too late. Another pulse of energy built along the Leviathan's hull. Then, in a blink, the space around it rippled. A second blast cut through fleeing Salzar ships like they were nothing. Their hulls imploded, torn apart by gravitational distortions before they even had a chance to react. "By the stars," whispered Lieutenant Greaves. "That thing doesn't fire weapons. It rewrites the laws of physics." No one could argue. The Leviathan was beyond anything humanity had ever produced, beyond anything any race had ever seen. It was destruction incarnate, an executioner unleashed upon the galaxy. But the battle wasn't over. Not yet. A new transmission flashed across Rain's display. It wasn't from Exalzar. It was from the Leviathan itself. A cold, artificial voice filled the bridge. Human command authorization required. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Rain straightened. He had been expecting this. He took a deep breath and spoke, his voice steady. Admiral Rains. Command authorization. Black Protocol. Omega-1. For a moment, there was silence. Then, authorization accepted. The bridge lights flickered. The tactical display shifted. The Leviathan was no longer operating on its own. It was now under direct human command. And humanity had a decision to make. The battle had been won, but war still raged across the stars. The Telzar Empire was vast, their fleets endless. The Leviathan had proved its power, but was this just the beginning? A new transmission arrived, this time from Earth's High Command. Admiral Rains, came the voice of Supreme Commander Henshaw. We've received the battlefield data. We know what the Leviathan is capable of. A pause. Then, are you prepared to take the next step? Rains exhaled slowly. He looked at the wreckage, the bodies, the silence that followed total annihilation. Then he looked at the Leviathan, humanity's ultimate weapon. The galaxy had thought they could defy humanity. Now, they would learn the cost. Commander, Rains said, we're not just taking the next step. He turned back to the screen, eyes locked onto the stars beyond. We're ending this war. The battlefield was silent, but the war was far from over. The Leviathan hovered in the void, its colossal frame casting a shadow over the wreckage of the defeated Exalzar fleet. The enemy's strongest forces had been torn apart in mere minutes, their once mighty warships now nothing more than drifting husks. But this was only a fraction of their empire's power. The true war had yet to begin. Admiral Rains stood at the command deck of the Valiant, staring at the tactical display. The data streams confirmed what he already knew. Every Exalzar outpost, every stronghold, every hidden fleet across the stars had now seen the Leviathan in action. And they were terrified. Messages flooded in from the Exalzar command networks. Some were desperate calls for reinforcements. Others were warnings that humanity had gone too far, that this level of destruction could not be allowed to exist. But Rains knew the truth. The galaxy had never been fair to humanity. They had been mocked, ignored, treated as a lesser race, forced to beg for a seat at the table. They had watched as their colonies were raided, their people slaughtered. Every diplomatic meeting, every peace treaty had been a deception, a way to keep humanity weak while the other empires carved up the stars. But now, the balance had shifted. The Exalzar weren't planning a counterattack. No, they were doing something far worse. They were calling an emergency session of the Galactic Concordance, the ruling council of the largest empires in the known universe. Their plan was clear. Humanity would not be fought. It would be erased. If the galaxy could not defeat the Leviathan in battle, they would unite every empire, every fleet, every force they could muster, and they would destroy Earth before humanity could strike first. Rains clenched his fists. He had expected resistance. But this was something else. The entire galactic order was now aligning against them. A new transmission came through. High Command. Supreme Commander Henshaw's face appeared on the holoscreen, his expression unreadable. We've intercepted the enemy's communications, Admiral, he said. The Concordance is preparing a full-scale extermination campaign. We don't have weeks. We don't have days. We have hours before they declare humanity an existential threat and launch everything they have. Rains exhaled sharply. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, but he did not waver. He turned toward the viewport, gazing at the Leviathan, humanity's final weapon, floating silently in the abyss. There was no time left for diplomacy. There was no time left for mercy. "Then we strike first," Rains said, his voice cold as the void. Henshaw hesitated. "Are you sure?" Rains didn't blink. "They've already made their choice. Now, we make ours." The order was given. The Leviathan's engines roared to life, its massive form shifting as it set its sights on the heart of the Galactic Concordance. This was no longer just a battle. This was humanity's final ultimatum. The Leviathan moved through the void like a predator stalking its prey. Its engines burned cold, silent against the vast emptiness of space. Every Xalzar sensor station along its path had gone dark, either obliterated or forced into silence by the sheer terror of what approached. Inside the warship's command center, Admiral Rains stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the holographic battlefield. The Galactic Concordance had made their decision. Every empire, every species that once ignored humanity had now joined forces under a single directive: wipe humanity out before it was too late. They thought they still had time. They thought humanity would hesitate. But the Leviathan was already on the move. The Valiant and its accompanying fleet followed in its wake, forming an iron wall around humanity's greatest warship. They would not allow it to be overwhelmed. They would defend it to the last. A transmission came through, urgent, desperate. Supreme Commander Henshaw's face appeared on the screen, his voice calm but grave. "The Concordance just made it official," he said. "They've declared humanity a rogue state. Every fleet, every empire is now authorized to engage us on sight." Rains didn't flinch. "We expected this." Henshaw nodded. "We also intercepted something else. The Concordance is gathering at Varen Prime for an emergency war council. Every high-ranking official, every top admiral. If we hit them now, we could take them all out in one strike." A moment of silence filled the bridge. The weight of the decision pressed down on everyone. Varen Prime wasn't just a meeting place. It was the fortress world of the Concordance. It was heavily defended, surrounded by planetary shields, orbital cannons, and some of the deadliest warships in the galaxy. A direct assault would be suicide. But hesitation was a luxury they could no longer afford. "The Leviathan wasn't built for defense," Rains said. "It was built to end wars before they begin." He turned to his crew. "Set course for Varen Prime." A murmur ran through the bridge. They knew what this meant. There would be no turning back, no second chances. Either the Leviathan would break the galaxy's will to fight, or humanity would be wiped from existence. As the engines roared and the fleet jumped to FTL, Rains clenched his fists. The galaxy had made its move. Now, humanity would make its final strike. The Leviathan emerged from FTL like a phantom, its massive frame casting an ominous shadow over Varen Prime. The Concordance's fortress world shimmered below, its planetary shields glowing like a second atmosphere. Orbital defense stations lit up as alarms blared across the system. Humanity's greatest warship had arrived, and the galaxy's most powerful fleets were about to face it. Admiral Rains stood at the center of the bridge, his expression unreadable. Around him, his officers worked with quiet efficiency, their hands moving over holographic controls. Every system was primed. Every weapon was locked. The battle was about to begin. The Concordance's response was immediate. Their warships, stationed across the system, adjusted formation. They had been expecting an attack, just not this soon. Not like this. A transmission flickered onto the main screen. Supreme Commander Valter, the architect of the war against humanity, glared at Rains from the other side. "This is madness." "Admiral," Valter said, his voice filled with forced confidence, "you cannot hope to win this fight. You are outnumbered, outgunned. Surrender now, and perhaps we will show mercy." Rains didn't blink. "Mercy? Like the mercy you showed our colonies, like the mercy you showed the civilians on Acheron Prime." His voice was calm, but the steel in his words was unmistakable. Valter's mandibles clicked together in frustration. He had expected fear, desperation. Instead, He was met with the cold resolve of a species that had already accepted the cost of war. Rains leaned forward. "You wanted to break humanity. Instead, you forced us to build this." He gestured to the Leviathan, its weapon systems coming online. "Now you get to see what that mistake cost you." Before Walter could respond, the transmission cut out. The battle began. The Leviathan moved first. From its hull, thousands of railgun slugs, plasma lances, and kinetic warheads tore through the void. The first enemy ships exploded before they even had time to maneuver. The Concordance fleet returned fire, their combined firepower lighting up the darkness. But the Leviathan did not slow. Its shields absorbed the first wave of attacks, dispersing energy across its layer armor. Then, the real destruction started. The Leviathan's main cannon, a weapon so powerful it could crack planets, fired its first shot. A beam of searing energy cut through space, obliterating an enemy battleship in a single instant. The explosion rippled outward, catching smaller vessels in its wake. The fleet around the Leviathan moved with ruthless coordination. The Valiant led a strike force, weaving between enemy ships, launching precision torpedo strikes. Fighters danced through the chaos, cutting through Concordance squadrons like a blade through flesh. But the enemy was vast. No matter how many ships fell, more took their place. They were swarming, adapting, focusing their fire. The Leviathan's shields began to buckle under the sheer intensity of the bombardment. Warning lights flashed across the bridge. Still, Rains did not waver. "Hold the line," he commanded. The battle raged, the fate of humanity hanging in the balance. The battle had raged for hours, turning the void above Varan Prime into a graveyard of burning wrecks. The Leviathan, humanity's deadliest warship, stood at the heart of it all. A wounded beast, scared but unbroken. Its shields flickered, its hull bore deep wounds from relentless barrages, but it still held the line. Admiral Rains wiped the blood from his forehead, his grip tightening around the command railing. Across the bridge, his officers worked frantically, their voices barely heard over the alarms and distant explosions. "The Concordance fleet is reorganizing," Lieutenant Hale reported, eyes fixed on the tactical display. "They're concentrating fire on our ventral side, trying to find a weak point." "They won't find one," Rains said coldly. On the screen, Supreme Commander Walter's remaining warships moved with renewed aggression. Though their losses had been staggering, their numbers were still overwhelming. Fighters swarmed like locusts, targeting the Leviathan's exposed areas. The enemy's dreadnoughts adjusted their angles, preparing for a final, decisive strike. Another officer called out, "Structural integrity at 60%. Shields failing in multiple sectors." A deafening explosion rocked the ship as enemy fire punched through a weakened section of armor. Secondary blasts tore through the lower decks. Fire and smoke filled parts of the ship, and crew members fought to contain the damage. But the Leviathan did not stop. Rains turned to his weapons officer. "Status of the main cannon." Lieutenant Vasquez checked the readouts, the reactors barely holding. "We can fire one last shot. But after that..." He hesitated. "We'll be dead in the water." Rains nodded. "Then let's make it count." His eyes locked onto the tactical display, where the enemy flagship loomed at the center of the Concordance formation. Walter's ship was their command hub. Take it out, and the rest of the fleet might break. It was a gamble, but humanity had always been gamblers. "Target Walter's ship. Full power to the main cannon," Rains ordered. "Admiral, if we fire, our energy reserves..." "I know," Rains cut him off. "Do it." The ship groaned as power was diverted. Lights flickered. The Leviathan's engines dimmed as the reactor funneled everything into the main weapon. The enemy must have sensed what was coming. Walter's warships repositioned, their guns focusing all fire on the Leviathan, desperate to stop the inevitable. The ship trembled as more hits slammed into its armor, entire sections rupturing into space. But it didn't matter. The cannon fired. A blinding beam of destruction tore through the void, an unrelenting force of raw energy. It struck the enemy flagship dead center. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then, a massive explosion erupted, consuming the vessel in a firestorm so intense that nearby ships were caught in its wake. The flagship shattered, debris scattering across the battlefield. On the Concordance fleet's comm channels, chaos erupted. Without their leader, confusion set in. Some ships hesitated, others turned to flee. The once coordinated enemy attack broke apart like a crumbling wall. The tide had turned. But the Leviathan was spent. The mighty warship drifted, its power reserves nearly empty, its engines failing. Warnings flashed across every console. Hull breaches, oxygen leaks, reactor instability. The list went on. Hale turned to Rains. "Admiral, we need to retreat. The fleet can't hold much longer without us." Rains exhaled slowly. "Send the signal. All ships, fall back." As the battered remains of humanity's fleet regrouped and retreated, the Concordance forces, now leaderless, fractured, and reeling from their losses, made no move to pursue. They had learned their lesson. The Leviathan had done its job. Humanity had won this battle. But Rains knew the war was far from over. The galaxy had seen what humanity was capable of, and they would never forget it.